It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in Portland. It's the kind of day when the air feels still and the ticking of the clock sounds louder than usual. Helen Carter, a woman in her late 40s, stood in her kitchen surrounded by the scent of fresh apples and cinnamon. She had just taken a pie out of the oven, the same recipe her mother once made when the house felt too quiet. Ever since her son Ethan left for college, those quiet days had become more frequent. She told herself she didn't mind the peace, but sometimes the silence felt too heavy. As she poured tea into her favorite floral cup, the doorbell rang. The sound startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door, finding a tall young man standing there with a polite smile. His brown hair was slightly messy, and his eyes held that mix of confidence and nervousness that young people often have. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked. "I'm Liam, Ethan's friend. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I was passing by and thought I'd drop in. Ethan always said you make the best tea in Oregon." Helen blinked in surprise but quickly smiled. "Oh, Liam. Of course, come in. It's been so long since I saw any of Ethan's friends around here." She led him inside, suddenly aware of how quiet her home was. The warmth of the oven filled the room, and the scent of the pie seemed to welcome him more than words could. Liam looked around, smiling faintly at the framed family pictures on the walls. "This house feels exactly like I imagined," he said softly. "It's warm. You can tell someone cares about every little detail." Helen chuckled lightly, trying to hide the small flutter in her chest. "Well, thank you. I try to keep it that way. Tea?" He nodded eagerly, sitting down at the small round table near the window. Helen placed the teapot and cups between them, noticing how he relaxed, as if the house itself made him feel safe. They spoke about small things at first: college life, how Ethan was doing, how quickly time seemed to pass. Liam talked with a calm sincerity that Helen found refreshing as they talked. Helen realized how rare it was to have real conversation these days. Not rushed, not shallow, but simple and genuine. Liam wasn't like most young people she knew. He listened carefully and spoke with thought. When he laughed, his whole face lit up, and for a brief moment, she was reminded of how Ethan used to smile when he was younger. Liam's gaze wandered to a photo on the shelf. A picture of Helen, Ethan and her late husband at the beach. "Ethan told me about your husband," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. He sounded like a great man." Helen's smile softened. It's been years, but I still miss him sometimes." Liam nodded, his voice low. "I understand. I lost my mom when I was in high school. That's partly why Ethan and I became close. He helped me through that time." The air between them grew tender, not heavy, but filled with something unspoken. Helen saw the honesty in his eyes and felt an ache of compassion. "I'm sorry, Liam," she said gently. "Losing someone changes everything, doesn't it?" He nodded again, his gaze meeting hers. "It does. But sitting here, it feels like I remember what home feels like. You have that kind of warmth." Helen looked down, her fingers brushing against the teacup. She wasn't used to such words anymore, not in that tone, not with that quiet sincerity. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it stirred something inside her. A small reminder that she was still seen, still capable of being appreciated beyond her role as someone's mother. They continued talking. And time slipped away without notice. The tea cooled, but the conversation stayed warm. Liam told her about his studies in architecture, his part-time job at a bookstore, and how he often felt invisible among crowds of people rushing through their lives. Helen listened, nodding thoughtfully, offering little pieces of advice in return. "You're thoughtful, Liam," she said after a while. "You remind me a bit of Ethan when he was younger, but there's something different about you. Quieter, maybe?" He smiled shyly. "My mom used to say that too. She said I notice things that others overlook." Helen looked out the window, the afternoon sunlight painting soft gold across the kitchen. That's a rare quality. Most people rush past the little things that make life beautiful. When she turned back, Liam was already watching her, not inappropriately, but with a kind of calm admiration. "You notice them too?" he said. That's why your home feels alive. You care about the small things. Helen's heart fluttered again, not because of attraction, but because it had been a long time since anyone had noticed her that way. Not just as Ethan's mother or a widow, but as a person with warmth and presence. As they finished their tea, she offered him a slice of the pie. "You can't visit without trying this," she teased. He laughed. "Ethan said you make the best pie." I see now he wasn't exaggerating. He took a bite and smiled in contentment. "This reminds me of when my mom used to bake on Sundays. Feels familiar." Their eyes met for a brief moment, a moment that felt tender and comforting. There was no tension, no unspoken intentions, just a connection between two souls who had both known. Loneliness in different forms. The clock chimed softly in the background, and Helen realized the afternoon had slipped into evening. "You should probably get going before it gets too late," she said kindly, though part of her wished he would stay a little longer. He stood, thanking her again for the tea and the pie. "You've no idea how much this visit meant to me," he said. "It's been a long time since I felt this peaceful." Helen smiled, her heart full but conflicted. "You're welcome any time, Liam. This house always has room for good company." As he walked out the door, she followed him with her eyes until he disappeared down the quiet street. When she closed the door, the silence returned, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. Something about the afternoon lingered, a soft warmth in her chest, a sense that life still had surprises left for her. She went back to the kitchen, placing the empty cups in the sink. Her reflection in the window caught her attention. She looked the same, yet somehow different. Maybe it was the smile she hadn't realized had stayed on her lips. Maybe it was the small spark of something she couldn't quite name that night. As she sat by the window with another cup of tea, Helen thought about the unexpected visit. It had been just a simple afternoon tea, pie, and conversation, yet it had touched something deep within her. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, valued, and connected. And though she didn't know what it meant or where it would lead, she knew one thing for sure: that unexpected knock on her door had changed something quietly, deeply, and beautifully inside her heart. The next week came and went, and Helen found herself thinking about that afternoon more than she wanted to admit. It wasn't the tea or the conversation itself. It was the warmth she had felt. The way Liam had looked at her as if she still mattered. Life had become quiet since Ethan left for college, and though she never complained, she missed being needed, missed the laughter that once filled the house. So when Liam texted saying he was passing through town again and wondered if he could stop by for tea, she didn't hesitate. "Of course," she replied, trying not to sound too eager by the time he arrived. She had already set the table with her best teacups and a plate of freshly baked cookies. When she opened the door, Liam stood there holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For you," he said, smiling awkwardly. "Just to thank you for the other day." Helen blinked, surprised. "Oh, Liam, you didn't have to." She accepted them, touched by the gesture. The flowers were simple, daisies, lavender, and a sprig of rosemary, but they carried thoughtfulness, something far more meaningful than a store-bought bouquet. They sat at the table again, sunlight falling through the curtains. Helen poured the tea while Liam looked around the room as if it was already familiar. "I miss this," he said softly. "It feels peaceful here." Helen smiled. "You're always welcome, Liam. How's college treating you?" He sighed, leaning back. "Busy, tiring. Sometimes I wonder if I'm even doing the right thing. Everyone seems to know where they're headed, and I'm still figuring it out." Helen looked at him kindly. "You're young. It's okay not to have all the answers yet." He gave her a small smile, but then grew thoughtful. "I think people expect too much too soon. My dad wants me to take over the family business, but I want to design things, buildings, houses, spaces that make people feel like this." He gestured around her home. Safe, warm, real. Helen felt her chest tighten. "That's a beautiful goal, Liam. Creating something that makes people feel at home. That's a kind of kindness, too." 3 days passed before Helen found the letter. It was tucked between the morning mail bills, a flyer. and a small cream-colored envelope with her name written in neat, careful handwriting. She instantly recognized it, Liam. Her heart gave a small, surprised flutter. She wasn't expecting anything from him. Their last meeting had been warm, gentle, and unexpectedly comforting. But after he left, she assumed life would return to its quiet rhythm. Yet as she stood in her kitchen holding that letter, she realized something inside her had shifted since that day. She sat down by the window, sunlight pouring in through the curtains, and slowly opened the envelope. The note inside was short, but every word felt sincere. Mrs. Carter, thank you again for that afternoon. It reminded me that kindness still exists in the world. You made me feel seen when I didn't realize how invisible I had become. If you ever need company, I'd love to visit again, not as Ethan's friend, but as someone who truly admires the woman you are. Helen read the words twice, then a third time. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the letter on the table. She didn't know how to feel flattered, touched, or uncertain. It wasn't a love letter, not exactly, but it wasn't something ordinary either. It carried honesty, a quiet admiration that stirred something deep within her, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the letter. Her thoughts wandered to the past, the long years after her husband's passing. The loneliness that had followed, the routines that had turned her days into quiet repetitions. And then to Liam, his gentle voice, the way he listened, the softness in his eyes when he spoke about loss. He was young, yes, but his soul carried a kind of maturity, an understanding that connected with her own pain. Helen reminded herself that he was her son's friend. She had to be careful. People could misunderstand. She didn't want gossip or whispers. Still, something about that note touched a part of her that had long been asleep, the part that still wanted to be seen, heard, and valued, not for her age or role, but for her heart. That evening she made tea just like she had when he was last there. She didn't plan to. It just happened, the habit of warmth. The house was quiet, the kettle whistling softly. She sat by the window with the letter beside her and let her thoughts wander. What did Liam mean by admires the woman you are? Maybe it was just gratitude, she told herself. Maybe he simply wanted to express kindness. But another voice whispered that it was more, not romance, but connection, genuine and emotional, born from mutual understanding. Later that night, as she washed the dishes, Helen's phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Hey, Mom. Hope you're doing good. Liam mentioned he stopped by. Said you two talked a lot. He really likes you, said you're like a second mom. Helen paused, reading it slowly. A second mom. She smiled, though something inside her ached in a way she couldn't quite explain. Ethan's words were innocent, but they reminded her of boundaries she hadn't wanted to think about. Still, she couldn't ignore the truth. Liam's letter wasn't written out of obligation. It was written from the heart. The next morning, Helen placed the letter in a drawer. Not to hide it, but to keep it safe. She told herself she wouldn't reply, at least not right away. Yet every time she passed the window or heard a car outside, she caught herself wondering if it was him. Days turned into a week. Autumn was slowly painting the neighborhood in gold and red. Helen found herself baking more often, tidying the house with new energy, as if expecting a guest. But she never said it aloud. She told herself she was just enjoying the season. One Friday afternoon, as she was tending to her garden, she saw a familiar figure walking up the path, tall, calm, carrying a small box. Liam, her heart jumped. Liam, she called out, brushing her hands on her apron. He smiled, slightly nervous. Hi, Mrs. Carter. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I brought something, my mom's old teacups. I thought you might like them. Helen froze for a moment, touched beyond words. Oh, Liam, you didn't have to. I wanted to, he said softly. I remember you said you love old things that hold stories. These belong to her. I think she'd be happy knowing someone kind is using them. Helen took the box carefully, her throat tightening. Thank you. That's incredibly thoughtful. They went inside and she placed the cups on the table. Each one was delicately painted with blue and gold patterns. Time had faded them slightly, but they were beautiful. "They're perfect," she whispered. "Truly perfect." As she poured tea into one of them, Liam smiled. "You remind me of her sometimes," he said quietly. "Not in how you look, but in how you speak. Calm, gentle. The way you make people feel comfortable." Helen looked up, her eyes meeting his. For a long moment, neither spoke. It wasn't awkward, it was understanding, deep and unspoken. Two lonely hearts, recognizing something familiar in each other. "Liam," she finally said, her voice soft, "you're very kind. But you don't have to say things like that." "I'm not saying them because I have to," he replied, his tone honest. "I'm saying them because they're true." Helen felt her heart tighten again. Not in discomfort, but in emotion. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen so sincerely. "You should be spending time with people your own age," she said gently, trying to smile. He shook his head. "Sometimes the right company isn't about age. It's about understanding." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The ticking clock, the soft wind outside, the faint whistle of the kettle. Everything quieted except for the space between their words. Helen broke the silence first. "Thank you for the cups, Liam. They'll always remind me of kindness, yours and your mother's." He nodded, standing to leave. "I'll come by again, if that's all right." She hesitated for only a second before saying, "Yes, I'd like that." After he left, Helen stood at the window, watching him disappear down the path again. The soft evening light made the street glow golden. She held the letter once more, now knowing what she hadn't before, that sometimes the heart recognizes something good before the mind can explain it. That night she placed one of the teacups beside her window and smiled. The letter lay nearby, its words still echoing gently in her heart. There was no promise, no expectation, only quiet gratitude, quiet warmth, and a gentle realization that sometimes life brings back light in the most unexpected ways. Helen didn't know where it would lead, but she didn't feel guilty or afraid. She simply felt alive again, reminded that kindness can heal, and that connection, no matter how it begins, can change a life in small, beautiful ways. A few weeks passed before Liam came again. The days had grown shorter, and the evenings carried the crisp chill of autumn. Helen had begun to expect his visits without admitting it to herself. Each time the doorbell rang, a part of her heart fluttered with quiet hope. Yet she also told herself she had to stay sensible. He was her son's friend. Young and kind, but their bond was something delicate. Still, kindness has its own gravity. And it had pulled them together again. That Saturday afternoon, Helen was in the kitchen arranging the new teacups Liam had given her when she heard the knock. She smiled before she even opened the door. Liam stood there holding a small bouquet of daisies. "For you," he said shyly. "I saw them on the way here. They looked too cheerful to leave behind." Helen accepted them, touched as always by his thoughtfulness. "You really have a way of making my house brighter," she said softly. "Come in. I just made tea." They settled at the table like they had done before, a familiar rhythm now. The air felt easy, the kind of comfort that only came from trust. Helen noticed how natural it felt to have him there. He wasn't just Ethan's friend anymore. He had become someone who brought warmth into her quiet home. They spoke about simple things, his classes, her garden, the neighbors. But soon their conversation grew deeper, as it often did. Liam talked about his dreams of becoming an architect, how he wanted to design spaces that made people feel peace. Not just buildings, he explained, but homes that breathe. Helen listened, smiling. "You already understand more than most people your age. You're not building walls, you're building belonging." He smiled at her words, grateful. "You always say things that stay with me," he said. "You make me think differently." Helen blushed slightly, surprised by how easily he could make her feel seen. She hadn't realized how much she had missed this real conversation. Emotional closeness and the feeling that her words mattered. It wasn't romance, not in the usual sense, but something softer, something that reached the heart in quieter ways. After tea, they stepped outside to the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The world felt calm, and the silence between them was peaceful. Liam leaned against the railing, watching the horizon. "It's funny," he said after a while. "I used to think peace was about being alone. But I think it's about being with someone who makes silence feel full." Helen turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "That's a beautiful way to put it." He looked at her and smiled, not boldly, but with the quiet honesty she had come to recognize in him. "You've been that peace for me, Mrs. Carter. I mean it." Her breath caught slightly. She wanted to say something, but words failed her. For a moment she just looked at him, this young man who had entered her life unexpectedly and somehow brought color back into it. "Liam," she said gently, "you've been kind to me in ways you don't even realize. You remind me that life isn't finished giving us good things." He nodded, understanding more than she said. Sometimes good things come when we least expect them. They stood there quietly, the wind brushing through the trees, the world around them slowing down. There was no need to name what they felt. It wasn't love in the romantic sense. Not yet. And maybe never. It was connection, human, kind, and healing. After a while, Helen broke the silence. "You should visit when Ethan comes home next month." "He'd love to see you," Liam smiled. "I'd like that." Then, hesitating, he added softly, "But I hope I can still visit before that, just for tea." Helen's smile deepened. "Of course. My door's always open." As the evening grew cooler, Liam prepared to leave. He turned to her at the door. "You know," he said with a grin, "I think your tea has become my favorite part of the week." Helen laughed lightly. "You're too kind." "It's just tea, Liam." He shook his head. "No, it's not just the tea. It's how it feels being here. Calm, like everything makes sense for a while." Those words stayed with her even after he was gone. She stood by the window again, watching him walk down the path the same way she had the first time. Only now the feeling was different, not confusion or uncertainty, but quiet gratitude. She knew this connection was unusual, something that might raise eyebrows if others knew, but she also knew it was pure, born out of understanding and shared loneliness. As night fell, Helen sat by the fire with the daisies in a vase beside her. She thought about the way life had surprised her. How? After years of silence, someone had come along who reminded her that her kindness still mattered. Liam hadn't replaced anything or anyone. He had simply reminded her of the warmth she still carried inside her. Later that week, she received another note, just a small card left on her doorstep. It read, "Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Carter. I don't think you realize how much light you bring into people's lives. Some of us are just better because we met you." Helen held the card to her chest, smiling through quiet tears. Not tears of sadness, but of recognition, of being seen, appreciated, valued once again. She placed the card next to the letter he had written weeks ago. Both felt like gentle reminders that life, no matter how quiet, always holds the power to surprise. Over the following months, Liam continued to visit occasionally. Their meetings remained simple: tea, conversation, laughter. Sometimes they talked about Ethan, sometimes about books, and sometimes about nothing at all. There were no promises, no need for explanation. It was enough that their hearts found comfort in each other's presence. Helen's neighbors noticed the visits, but saw nothing unusual. Just a young man kindly keeping an older woman company. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. Yet for Helen, it meant more. Each time Liam left, she felt lighter, more alive. His friendship had healed something quiet inside her, a loneliness she had carried without realizing. How deep it ran. One evening, as she sat alone sipping tea, Helen looked at the fading sky and whispered, "Sometimes people enter our lives not to stay forever, but to remind us we still have the capacity to feel." The daisies on her table had dried but still stood upright, a gentle symbol of something that had grown and lived beautifully, even if only for a while. Helen smiled, knowing that life had given her a gift, not a romance, but a rediscovery of warmth, connection, and hope. She didn't need anything more. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of quiet gratitude, soft memories, and the knowledge that sometimes a shared cup of tea can change everything. And so, every Sunday afternoon, she made an extra cup just in case someone kind and unexpected knocked on her door again.